We'll make a start. Good morning. Welcome to the first session of the Pick and Mix track. My name is Wes Hackett. I'm a Principal Solution Architect at a Microsoft Gold partner called Content and Code based here in the UK. I've been working with SharePoint since about 2003, so seen 2003, 2007, 2010, and now working with 2013, primarily in Office 365. It's my Twitter handle and my email address. Feel free to contact me via either. I'll do what I can to answer questions. So what we're going to look at today is a bit of dev, a bit of theory, a bit of demo around apps for Office. So we're going to look at introducing what apps for Office are, taking a closer look at both a mail app and a task pane app, and then we're going to move on to a prototype for a SharePoint hosted app for Office, which is a real mouthful to try and describe. And then finally talk about the opportunities you have as SharePoint and Office developers to build apps for both. So first off, where did we start? Well, Microsoft looked at the trends that are impacting the way that people work. They've assessed the impact that devices and people in organisations are having in the workplace. There's a lot more bring your own device. There's a lot more people that are hobby coders using HTML5, etc. And also organisations moving things into a more service-orientated provisioning, so cloud being the kind of model that most are trying to adopt. So with the 2013 Office release, Microsoft's tenets were that it should be a delightful experience working across multiple browsers, and you'll see that from the likes of the Office profile, so it knows which documents you'd edited last, knows where you were. You can go to any device and it kind of picks up, oh, you were on slide 12, do you want to jump back to slide 12? It brings in kind of social aspects, so Outlook's becoming more intelligent, the kind of social connector's now been baked in. And then for the IT Pro guys, there's the things about control, so how do you roll it out, how do you make sure it's up to date. Kind of the thing we're going to look at today is the extensibility, so the apps for Office model. And then finally, kind of Microsoft wanted it as a service. So Office is moving from a install-only type application to an install on any device from the cloud. So their vision was modernising that platform. And they assessed the market today. They looked at the fact that globally there's over 700,000 SharePoint developers, and not many of those were also dabbling in Office development. They looked at the industry trends in terms of technical delivery and technical extensions, so HTML5, CSS3, and finally they're following their principles that they have for SharePoint apps, which is designed for the cloud, enabling a consistent development platform. And then finally, giving the choice back to developers on what technology they actually use to implement those Office apps. All of that resulted in the cloud app model, which those that are familiar with SharePoint apps are going to already be quite familiar with the way that an Office app is structured. They're extensions too, but they're not hosted within the application. You can use a familiar tool set. They employ the web standards of HTML5 and CSS3, and they're a lot easier to deploy and maintain because you've got an Office marketplace now, so you can deploy to the marketplace either internally or from the public marketplace to sort of perform updates and push your apps live. Anyone that's ever tried to push the kind of 2010 add-ins across an enterprise knows the kind of pain that just a simple thing like an update or a deployment need to take into account. So that's a quick example of what the marketplace looks like. You can get that by going to any of the Office 2013 apps and saying insert Office app, and then you'll be taken to the marketplace experience, and you can go and try out some of the free apps that are in there or look forward to purchasing others. So let's move into a little deeper information around Office apps themselves. There are three styles currently of Office app. There is a content app, which is embedded inside that document, primarily at the moment in Excel. You can think of it like an image or a graph or one of the sort of smart art type pieces of Word, etc. And then there's the task pane app, which is either on the left or the right of the page and provides a kind of exactly that, a task pane, in the same way that your research panel in 2010 gave you a task pane. And then the final one, there's a special type of app for Exchange mailboxes, which is known as the Mail app. Now, this is only available in Exchange 2013. So if you've got any other version of Exchange, you can't have the Mail apps, even if you've got the 2013 Outlook client. It has to have the Exchange up to date as well. So where do these shapes appear? Currently, as we stand today, the content app is only available in Excel. The task pane is available in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Project, and the mail app is only available in Exchange 2013 and Outlook 2013. So what do they consist of? For the developers in the room, they consist of some form of web page. They consist of an app manifest, that's basically the catalogue entry. Combined together form the app for Office. So once you have those two things, you can deploy it out. You'll notice it's not stipulating where we deploy them. App development tools. Visual Studio 2012 would be the choice for most, but you're not limited to developing these things in just Microsoft development tools. You could use Dreamweaver because effectively you can build stuff with HTML and just JavaScript. You can use PHP, any of those things behind the scenes. So how does an app for Office, I wish they'd come up with an acronym for this. App for Office gets developed, the package is then pushed onto, well, the manifest half of the package is pushed onto the internal store or the public store. The actual app itself, so the bit that's functional, the pages you click, the bits that the user interacts with, that sits on a web server. And we're going to look in a second of where that web server might live, but it effectively isn't the same piece that sits in the App Store. Then, of course, it can be consumed by either corporate users or external users from a multitude of devices. So you can look at them on iPads, you can look at them on your laptops, you can look at them across devices like that. And you can actually share, and the sharing is an interesting one. If we take the Excel content app, for example, if you have a content app that's internal to your organization and it's pulling data from an internal system, if the user saves that document and sends it out to somebody who doesn't have access to the same internal system, that's a JPEG at the point it goes out across to the other organization. So they can still see the last state that that content app was in. So you're not kind of limiting yourselves to saying, okay, it's only for corporate people. You can still create that dashboard, save it, and send it across to other people to share. Hosting models. There are three primary hosting models. There is the provider hosted, which is where you stand up your own web servers. Exactly the same way that SharePoint hosting looks. This is exactly the same model. They've standardized the model for both. SharePoint hosted, which is what we're actually going to look at when we look at the example today. We're going to look at a SharePoint hosted app for Office. And then finally, an Office 365 specific one is the auto-hosted, where 365 leverages Windows Azure associated with your tenant to allow you to automate the push of the back-end code. So there's a lot of information about the app deployment model. It's the same as SharePoint's app deployment model, and I'm not going to cover that in detail today because that could fill this hour in its own right. But what we do need to look at is the common architecture. So you can see that there's a client-side logic block and there's a server-side logic block. And today we're going to look at just the client-side. So we're focused on the app, which is the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript. We're looking at the Office.js file, which then interacts behind the scenes with the Office APIs. So it's abstracting you away from needing to know all those horrible COM calls that your traditional Office add-in would need. So let's take a quick look at the JavaScript API as an overview. Everything hangs off Office context. So in the same way you have a SharePoint context, you have an Office context. Once you've got that, you can interact with the document if you're in a document-based application such as Excel and Word. That gives us the ability to do read-writes. It allows us to bind to custom XML. It allows us to store settings within that app. So for example, you can do it on a mailbox setting, you can do it on an individual mail item, or you can do it on Word documents. Mailbox can interact with the item, the user profile, the Exchange web services, and there's a point to note that you can call any Exchange web service. Once you choose to, you're effectively operating in the highest level of trust required for that mail app, and it can only be deployed by your Exchange administrator. So if you want to interact with the Exchange web services, you're effectively saying, I need full trust. Somebody needs to sort of give the okay for deployment of that app. Just interacting with the item and user profile effectively allows the user to self-install. So there's kind of a tipping point there of how much functionality versus the requirement for the user to install themselves. And then finally, projects allows you to interact with tasks and project information, which I believe we'll also get the same stuff as the document later in the life cycle. It's a bit of a heavy slide to kind of read off the top of your head, but the fundamental things is Word pretty much gets everything, because that's where they've invested the heaviest part of the API. Excel's next with the ability to do most things. And then finally, you've got the kind of Outlook one, which is very specific, which is it can interact with your mailbox, which the others can't, and it can also store settings. So let's have a quick look at a mailbox app. So I'm going to just sit down while I drive. So mailbox apps are deployed into the mailbox, and at the moment we can't see, there's no mailbox apps being displayed within this screen because they're contextual. So as your user changes mail item on either an inbound email or an inbound appointment, there's a set of rules firing behind the scenes that are kind of saying, should I invoke this app? So it's an on-demand invocation. So I can see here that somebody sent me an email talking about the Redmond Microsoft Visitor Center. And if I click in that, for the first time I've now got the mail apps launching. So we can see Bing Maps and action items there. Now those are fired against the rules. Again, your app has not yet executed. It said this app has been activated in terms of you can click in, but as a user, I've not invoked any of the functionality within it. So again, a key point for developers to understand is that you're not firing until the user says, yes, I'd actually like to use that app. So you can't just expect to run a rule and perform an action. It's actually user invoked. So if we have a quick look at an out-the-box one for action items, what it's done is it's used a rule set that looks at the content of the body of the email, and it's found some dates and time, and it thinks that I should be setting up some kind of appointment as an action item. So it's kind of prompting the user to do something. The next one is the Bing Maps. And again, wait for it. Yes, good. Excellent. So it's found two addresses within the email. We click into the first address. It's actually going to pick that address and map it onto a map as you'd expect. Or not. Demo gods, come on. Yes, there we go. Right, excellent. So that's quite useful. Really simple examples there. These are Microsoft delivered examples, so the stuff you don't have to really pay for. They're just adding value to the mailbox. You can think of scenarios around this stuff that would be really powerful. If you've got a line of business system and it comes in with a ticket number or an account number, you could be writing a mail app that kind of brings some of that information back from CRM or from your ticketing system into context at that point. So we're going to just go back to the slides and talk through some more information about those mail apps. So as we saw, we've got the kind of mail app activation screen. So these are the apps that are available, and they come with some maximum and minimum resolutions. They also come with the ability to have different rendering form factors. So what we just looked at was the desktop rendering, but it also can have a different UI for tablet and mobile. So when you look at OA on your mobile, for example, you could be rendering a different UI. And again, from a user experience point of view, that's quite important. Their availability is Outlook, Outlook Web App, and Mobile Outlook Web App. So this is the example we just looked at. So what's happening behind the scenes? Well, the first thing is that we deploy that manifest to the Exchange server. So the Exchange admin or the user is selecting to say, I want to add this mail app and push it out to my mailbox, or all mailboxes if you're the admin, and therefore it's getting pushed onto the actual Exchange. So this is why you need the dependency of having Exchange 2013 behind the scenes. Next off is, as an inbound item arrives, Outlook processes the rules, and we're going to have a quick look at the rule types in a second. And then finally, it loads the Office.js library to give you the ability as the app developer to kind of interact with that item. Things that it can extract from the object model, address, email address, meeting suggestions, contacts, phone numbers, task suggestions, and URLs. So it can find those things in the body content immediately So you don't have to kind of write large amounts of logic to kind of find just those basic entities. Something more specific, you're going to have to write regular expressions. So activation rules. That actually says item is, not item ls. It's not a typo, it's item is. And this effectively checks what type of item has come in. So the first thing is, if you only want to deal with appointment items, somebody sent you a meeting request, then you can do the item is, get the type, and then change what you display accordingly. Rule collection, you can have them and ors, so you can build up complex routing of those rules. Has attachment, does it have something attached? You know, think about how powerful it would be if you knew that something was attached. You go off to SharePoint, look for it, find it, and say, hey, this one you've got on email is actually out of date versus the one in SharePoint. Multiple versions of the truth. That's quite a cool way to start. Regular expression match. So anybody in the room a regular expression expert? Because I know I definitely wouldn't count myself as one. These have got immense power, but they're also the first point at which your mail app is likely to be shut down by Exchange Server. So Microsoft have put huge investment in this as a platform, but also a huge investment in making sure that your end user doesn't get their experience ruined by an app that doesn't perform. And what they're saying is that we will protect Outlook's performance so people don't say Outlook's really slow if somebody writes an add-in or an Office app that's ruining it. Like everyone remembers the Bluetooth add-in for Outlook 2010 and how it killed performance. They're kind of trying to avoid that. And regular expressions are the one they focus on the most because that has the most damage potential with a bad regular expression. So your processing logic for your rules need to actually activate on those mail items quite quickly. I think it's under 5 seconds at last time I was told, before your app is shut down. If it's 6 seconds, your app is shut down for that item and it won't activate. Item has a known entity, so that list that we had before, it'll say, yes, I found the known entity, and then it'll tell you what the entity is. Permissions. As I mentioned earlier, certain permissions require your Exchange admin to push that into the wider system. So there's 3 levels there. There's read, write, mailbox, read item, and restricted. Admin can add them all. End users can only do the restricted and read item. If they want to read and write the mailbox, that's effectively using the EWS services. So you're then into kind of full trust effectively. So just a couple of possibilities. Activate on patterns, bug tracking, as I mentioned, package tracking, case numbers, PO status lookup. Activate on entities and classes. So there's examples on the code gallery about hosting YouTube lookups. So it finds a YouTube video, puts the YouTube video player in the mail app. Activate on all items. I want to show it regardless of what happens. I can't see that this one's the default, but effectively you could be saying, okay, this activates regardless of any other particular rule I've found. So moving on to task pane apps. And we're going to take another look through a task pane app. This time I'm going to dive into Trusty Excel. So this one's available to you. If you've got 2013 and you go new document, you can pick the movie list demo app. There's another one that was, at the time of the Olympics, was great because it showed the medal counts, but of course that's all sort of gone very static now for reasons that are pretty obvious. So what we've got here is in this left-hand side, so over here, we've got this task pane app, which is sort of asking me about movies, and I've got a sheet that's pre-configured with some columns around those movies apps. So I can look for a movie. Probably give away the sort of films I watch. So do a search, it's going off to an external service. I can then choose to add that to my table, and we can see that on that row we've actually added the Fargo row. So pretty basic as an example, but you can see how bringing line of business data into a kind of dashboard experience for users could be quite easy to achieve now. You don't necessarily have to go through the whole kind of reporting suite to be able to build some real-time data. As well, think about the way that things are bound. So you'll see there that I've just picked up the bonfire of the vanities. It's gone off and also changed what the task pane's now selected. So it's the the binding, as you'd expect, with kind of data binding. The task pane is reactive to the stuff in the sheet, and it can put stuff in and out of the sheet. So that's a really basic example of how you could bring other systems into play when working with large Excel. So I think things I see across enterprise deployments at the moment, a lot of time is invested in Excel dashboards, but they have to go to X, Y, and Z system, cut and paste it in. Creating a little task pane app to do that and automate it, it's probably quite powerful. Okay, so back to the slides. So another task pane app, we're just talking about the fact that it's either left or right, and that can be packaged into that document. It's available in Word, Excel, Project, and PowerPoint. You can dock it, undock it, kind of drag it around, lock it. Standard size is 350 pixels. So again, when you're getting your UX developers involved, there's a guideline about how to create good interfaces within that constrained size. Content apps. So content apps, as I said earlier, are things that are generally embedded only at the moment in an Excel sheet. So we've got an example there where we've got the Bing maps, we've got some data, and the data will be bound to the Bing maps. So as you select a country, it'll probably zoom into the country. And those things, again, like I said, if you were to configure it, save it, send it, that becomes a JPEG that sits in the OpenXML definition of that Excel file and goes across the wire with that person. If the person on the other end also has the app, well, it springs back to life and it's in the state that the app was in. But you as a developer, again, need to think about state management within your apps. When somebody goes and opens the document, does the app start from its home page or does it start from the last page it was on when that app was actually last active? So just some user experience considerations. So it's available in Excel, an Excel web app, EWA. So this again, it's quite neat. It runs in the Office web apps within SharePoint. So if you've got one of these content apps, you've got desktop and web delivered, which kind of gets you around the device problem because you don't have to have it installed if you can browse to it. And then finally, you can set the default size. So what you feel is an appropriate size can be set through the manifest, and again, there's lots of information on the Office MSDN site around the particular manifest breakdowns. We're not going to cover every aspect today. This was the medal tracker I was talking about as the example. I'd love to have shown it real time, but like I say, the data services are now long since dormant. But effectively, what you had was a task pane and two content apps, and they come from different vendors, all in the same sheet. Now, they work together. When you select some medal tracking over there and it changes the data in here, these things will change. And you think to yourself, well, how do two vendors know about the APIs for each other and get their stuff working together? Well, they don't. What they do know is when I add this bubble diagram to my page, I bind it to specific columns in my data. The task pane is interacting with the data. Therefore, the data is updating and this thing is reflecting the change. So it's bound via the data. They're not app-to-app communications, it's app to data, and if something else modifies the data, it'll reflect it. So again, the way that you think about doing those dashboard experiences is kind of starting to change. Just rather than app talking to another app, it's talking to the underlying data, and those things are representing what it should do. Okay, so that's the overview of apps for Office, if you like. Now what we're going to do is take a look at one that is hosted within SharePoint. And it's very prototypey, and I wouldn't claim to be an HTML and CSS developer, so it's very basic looking. So what we've got is a thing called Document Accelerate. So the idea here is that how many times do you create the same kind of document but with different sections? So if you're working in IT Pro arena of SharePoint, you might say, okay, well, I've got farm topologies that are kind of standardized. I've got approaches to roll them out, and I've got configuration to roll out, and I can have lots of different chapters. And you probably sit there and go, okay, I've got a reference version, I've got all these chapters, and I only need 6 this time instead of 7 because it's not a massive farm, it's a medium farm. Well, this app is there to kind of help speed up document creation, where you can create reference content, go into Word in a task pane and insert that reference content to build a document. So what we have is an Office app, a SharePoint app, which is living in a SharePoint site. This happens to be my developer tenant. And it contains a document library. That document library contains our reference material, and behind the scenes, what it's done is it's in a text file, which is the document, it's stored the OpenXML definition of the section that you want to store as the reference content. So it's effectively just the OpenXML being stored. We've then got the ability to link into a Word template, and went a bit too far. Let me catch that back up, don't save. That's right. Thank you, Word. Come on. Windows 8, I love it. Okay, let's try again. So we click the Word document. So this Word document's being templated and delivered into the SharePoint app. So as you deploy the SharePoint app, there's a set of Word templates that have already got the task pane embedded in them. We just edit the document. I promise it was faster this morning. Okay. Oh, I was doing it. Okay, stupid thing. All right, result to wait. No, I don't want that one. Has it done it? No. Oh, right. Phew. I thought I was going to have the results of the video. Okay, so the perks of relying on Office 365 as your hosting environment as your developer tenant. It's not always the quickest. So we've got a blank document at the moment, and we've got a collection of reference content. So we can click Insert Reference Content, and that's going to go to another page within our app. So currently this app is being hosted within a SharePoint app web, so it's on the same app platform. It could be on your own provider hosted or auto hosted, so you can again change the models that you need depending on your particular requirements. So you could be using a lot more C# or PHP as a back end. I've chosen to keep it purely HTML and JavaScript at this point. What it's doing behind the scenes is it's going off and querying that document library, and it should be creating some insert items. As a speaker, this is very, very frustrating when it doesn't do it in your actual presentation. Come on. Yeah.
While you're waiting.
Yep.
Does all of this mean that VSTO is dead now?
Well, it's not dead in terms of you can still build them. Microsoft, they will still work. You still come with all the problems that deploying them across a large enterprise would have had, hence the kind of aspiration to move back to kind of this app model. So in terms of, while this hopefully spins up and gets me some data, the thing to note is that this kind of pane over in the right-hand side is actually not running in that client. It's not running on your machine. It's effectively a glorified iframe. So it's completely isolated from your machine. So you can deploy these out to a web server, put the manifest into your solution, and it will come back and do its thing. It's not doing it. Why is it not doing it?
Does it also work in web apps?
The content app does in Excel. The mail apps do across client and browser. The task panes, as they stand today, don't. although we are assured that that will improve over time. Okay, I did have... Okay, I can't find my... Oh, come on. All right, we'll move on. Hopefully that will come. We'll come back to that and have another look. Relying on the internet. All right. So apps for Office are kind of, the way that we've built this up here is we've said, okay, we've got an app, which is our document accelerate. We've built some HTML pages, some JavaScript that interacts with the document and SharePoint. That's great in its own right. You could deploy that to the catalog and it would deploy that app, and the user would then have to go back and say, okay, I want to add that app to that document and run it. What we've then created is actually a Word template with that task pane already embedded. So we've gone one step further and said, hey, when you launch this new type of Word document, you'll get that app already. You could then bind it into a document library, so you could create that as in the same way you do in SharePoint, you bind that document to the document library. I skipped that step, but what I have done is put the whole of that app and document template inside the app for SharePoint. So we've kind of got the layers of the onion thing going on. And that allows us to kind of deploy all of that in the same way that you would a SharePoint app. Anyone confused? So it's all getting a bit complex at this point. So think about the scenario. So let's walk through some of the scenarios. We've got an app only. So this is pretty targeted, or it's a distinct case. So we've got things like rich web content. So you might have a YouTube viewer. You might have data visualization, so that being Maps task pane you might be picking up. Reference tools, content authoring and publishing. Those things are kind of, they don't care what document they're associated to, so you can just deliver that as an app on its own. The next one is you've got a document template. So in the same way we saw that medal tracker, that document template has got 3 apps embedded in it. So it's got a task pane and 2 content apps. So again, you can say, okay, well, I can create a dashboard in Excel now where I've got a task pane that's pulling off my line of business data, and then I've got 3 or 4 different content apps building up the dashboard. So another sort of really powerful way of enabling those that are Excel familiar to kind of keep working where they feel comfortable. And then finally is the whole idea that this can be part of something bigger in the SharePoint app space. So host it in SharePoint and add app parts that look across the library and show some funky UI, and whatever else your SharePoint app needs to be. So, if you think about some of the enterprise examples of SharePoint apps that people are discussing at the moment, some of it handles documents, some of it's doing line of business, some of it's just tablet UI versus phone UI versus extra. So, it's just different options at different points. So we'll dive into the code, and hopefully when we come back to the Word doc, it will have caught up with the web request. Right, so has it caught me? Insert content? No, it's still doing it. All right. Okay, so let's take a look. How many devs have we got in the room? Okay, cool. So what we've got as a solution overview is the SharePoint app's called Document Accelerate. So the process by which you go through to create these is effectively you say, okay, I want a new SharePoint app. That gives us the container. And you can package up the things that you need within the container. So for this example, what I've got is, first off, I've got a site column, which is my reference content preview. This is just rich text, effectively. I've got some content types. So I've got a reference content type, which contains the columns I need in my library. So it's got the reference content and the title. Then I've got some lists, and I've got my document library being deployed to my app web. So we're not interacting with the host web, and that's kind of something that's important to realise. We're only interacting with our app web at this point. So what we would have if we ran this out, we'd have a SharePoint app that basically creates, give me that Visual Studio, there we go. A SharePoint app that effectively creates some buckets to put some stuff in. From there, we've actually then go ahead and add for the first time the Office app. So we can see there that it's added the manifest. So this is the descriptive of the Office app. So if we go and open that Office app up, what we do is we get a designer. So part of the Visual Studio tooling for Office apps gives you the designer to effectively manipulate the stuff in the manifest in the same way you can on a SharePoint app. So we can set up the icons, the source location, so we can say, this is the URL of the home page to launch. We can put the versioning, providers, all that sort of stuff. Interestingly, we can ask for the permissions. Well, this particular one needs to read and write to and from the document. And then finally, there's a thing for app domains. So if you needed to call across domains, so the cross-domain scripting issues, you can list the app domains within that Office app that it needs to call. And SharePoint and Office will kind of take care of some of the plumbing to get you across that domain boundary. Not all, but some. You still need to use the SP executor to call while making those calls. So again, that's all around the OAuth and the cross-domain scripting. So the app itself then appears in the folder above, and this is effectively where you build your logic. So what we've got is some default stuff, which is the app.js. This gives us a kind of little pop-up window that says, yes, my call has been successful. We might see that, hopefully. And then we've got a folder for each page, so effectively kind of replicating the CSS, the HTML, and the JavaScript for each page. And when we come into the screen, some really important things to realise. In a SharePoint app, you get given the host web, the app web, and some other tokens. Even though this is hosted on SharePoint, you don't get any of those tokens given to your Office app. So if you're relying on those tokens to know where your external data is in your other part of your SharePoint, you're going to have to write some logic to go and find it, or ask the user, what is the URL of my main SharePoint site, and store that in the local settings, because at this time they're not giving you across the tokens, because as far as it's concerned, it's just a web page and it's not part of SharePoint. So that's kind of the first thing to think about. The other sort of start point is Office initialize. So Office kicks in and it says, yeah, I'm up and I'm running. We get some start code and we can interrogate with kind of these lines, am I in Word? So you can find a piece of capability that's only available in Word and you can interrogate it to say, yeah, I'm in Word, I want to activate and therefore show. And that's kind of important if you've got an app that only works in one context. So for example, this wouldn't really work very well in probably Excel. You'd be pasting everything into one cell and it'd probably get a bit confused. So you'd want to turn off the UI and just show a different message. From there, we just do some basic configuration. So I've got a blend of CSOM and REST calls. And the reason I've got a blend is that some things are quicker and easier to do in CSOM. I'm not going to lie, they're just, it's an easier thing to work with as an ex-C# developer. Whereas other things like REST is better for the data access to and from. So one of the things while building up this prototype was the fact that the CSOM calls have only got a maximum payload of 1.5 megabytes. Well, that's about 3 paragraphs of OpenXML. Number of texts to the amount of XML, if you've ever looked, is huge. So when I wanted to say, okay, take 650 pages of a deployment guide and stick it as reference content, CSOM went, yeah, okay, not a chance. REST will go, yeah, I can do 2 gig, thank you very much. It takes a while, as we've seen, but it will do its thing and it will push that across the wire. So that gives us the right technology choice to push data to and from. So REST for pushing data, CSOM for getting some lightweight settings like, what's the web URL, what's the list URLs and things like that. Pretty important thing about cross-domain, again, is that Microsoft provided you a cross-domain executor, so you don't have to write that code yourself, but you do need to load it on demand. It's not loaded by default, so you need to call get script, one of the AJAX jQuery calls, and load the SP request executor to allow you to perform cross-domain calls. Then we go into load page, we do a bit of getting usernames, and effectively that's about it for the home page. That home page, as we saw, I still want to come back, damn it. That home page, as we saw, has got just 2 links on it, insert and add reference content. IntelliSense, it's kind of standard JavaScript fare, really. It knows what it knows in the debug files, but it's not great at understanding what you've extended it with. Also, there's some really interesting and probably best practice kind of articles by Scott Hillier about how to write good JavaScript. My example's not really following them because I don't really know JavaScript as well as he would. So it's kind of mine's very much procedural. It's calls and comes back with a result, and then I act upon it. Whereas Scott's kind of got the promises, and it's far better structured JavaScript. Is this actually loaded? We do full screen on it. Okay, well, that's a bit small. It's a bit small. So what I'm doing there, I'm sorry you can't really see it, but I'm just going through and showing the fact that it's just a list item, and there's the text, and as we jump into the OpenXML file, that's the OpenXML being stored in the document library. So if we go back out and we launch the Word template, prove it did work last night. We choose to edit that document, and we get that home page in the right, which has got the add new content and the insert reference content. It comes out with the insert content. We can choose to insert that content, and you saw how kind of snappy it is, just contradicting this morning. But that's inserted about 8 pages worth of content from that document library. Further on through the video, it shows you inserting 70,000 words, which is about 650 pages from the Microsoft 2013 deployment guide into that document. And that takes about 6 minutes, but it gives you 70,000 words. So you can see how REST has got quite a large capability of pushing in and out of that data model. It also allows us to effectively pull back just the columns that we want, and is the right, I believe, technology for pulling back and pushing to the data. So we'll dive back into Visual Studio while that's running, hopefully. There we go. So the insert page is effectively quite lightweight. It's got just a section that the JavaScript's going to come and render into. So we end up with initializing again. We just check we're in Word, because even though, remember what I said about state? Well, imagine if this thing was coming back to this page, not the home page. It still needs to know that whether it should or shouldn't activate. We do some basic stuff like getting web URLs, retrieve the list items. So it's a lightweight call, so I'm using CSOM to get the items from the list, use a bit of camel query to restrict what's brought back, firing those in, creating some line items, doing a click bind, all kind of standard fare. So get the file. So it's quite straightforward. You're placing a request to get the file identifier, and then you're getting the actual list item. And the point I wanted to show, just pin that out of the way. This function here is effectively where it adds it to the document. So in one line, I'm adding whatever came back into the document. And what I'm saying is that that's my body. So I've said get file via my call. And it's that type that's the important piece. There's 3 choices: text, HTML, and OOXML, which is the OpenXML format. If you choose to save it in one of those formats, it will come back in that format. And if you try and add it as a different format, well, you'll get unexpected results. Like if we say add that back as text, it will put the OpenXML into the document. So you kind of have to understand as well the various types and the power of the types. So The choice of using OpenXML is quite cool because it allows us to put images into into the Word document and actually pushes the binary of the image out into the document library as well. In the same way that if you send a Word document, your images are embedded in it as binary information and they go with the document. So that allows us to push images in as well as text, and full formatting comes back. If you just use text, effectively it strips all the formatting, it strips all the images, and it just becomes exactly that, just text. For the cross-domain call, because you don't get given the tokens, you need to get the kind of form digest tag token from one of the REST calls. So what I've got is a little helper method here, form digest, that just calls off to the context information via REST, comes back, and the returned information is parsed by JSON, and I just say, get the form digest value. So I'm doing a very basic low permission request into SharePoint to say, yeah, I want to call you. It says, yep, here's a token, gives you back. Now I can go and do whatever calls I need because I've got that token. If you were doing a provider hosted or auto hosted, you get the C# token helper. It's kind of mimicking some of the capabilities of that token helper class. So that's insert. New content is a little more complex. Basically, it relies on, again, checking whether it should be activated. But then we're saying save reference content. So again, very quickly from the Office object, we get the selected data. We're asking for it in OpenXML format. And then we're saying when you've got the data, so that's an asynchronous call as well, then I'll give it off to whatever logic I want to process that data with. So it comes back with succeeded. I want to go and create my list item. And those familiar with CSOM or REST calls to add a document to a document library know it's a two-step process. You can't really add the document and the metadata at the same time. So you push the file in, you get the ID of the file list item, and then you update the metadata as you see fit. And that's a kind of two-step process. So the first REST call, which is the one in this example, we're basically saying, okay, the file add, the URL is this, overwrite. That'll put all the data that we want into that text file. And then it will go into the create file handler, and it will come back and it will say, get me the ID. So we've got another list call, and that's getting the ID of the list item, and then that passes off. And this is where I was saying that my JavaScript is not as well structured as Scott's, because that will pass off to another handler that then does this update. So I actually want to set the title to the thing that's set in the text box. Then place that through an AJAX call, and then the item effectively then represents what I want. I've got the file and the metadata. Ha, it's caught up. Okay. We'll give it a really low payload. Hopefully that'll work. So we do save selection on add new reference. Yay. Right, success. It added it. Excellent. So we go back. Moral of the story is run from your local VM. Come on. Cool. Anyway, let's do that. All right. So just to cover off before we finish, let's think about the scenarios, because obviously that's the kind of piece where these things become exciting. Those demos are very basic. The kind of out-of-the-box Bing Maps is kind of basic in some ways. So visualizations, showing data in useful ways and binding to that data, creating that great-looking app, the dashboard. So the Bing example is a good visualization. It takes columns and rows of data and it makes them something interesting, like a map that are human beings more likely to understand. Contextual content, so mail apps, only show it when it's needed. It has rules of activation, and that you're always building up context there. You understand. You can do it in task panes as well. You could say, okay, the Wikipedia one picks up what you've searched for or what you've highlighted as the search term. It's contextually driven. Data enhancement. So again, this is where organizations can do value add. So you're saying, okay, I have a service that will perform this algorithm over data, pick the data up, perform the algorithm, put it back in the data sheet. Reference and research. So we kind of looked at this a little bit. There's reference material there that you can add in. The exact examples in the marketplace are things like the Britannica Encyclopedia, Wikipedia have got one, where you can put in a search term or highlight a word and it comes across into the task pane. Master and detail. So we saw that in the Excel movies one, where it reacts to the Excel sheet. The Excel sheet can be manipulated by it, so it's a master and a detail kind of record. Document authoring, a little bit of what we saw in the demo. Document publishing, so this is where if for example, if you have a publishing service that puts things into print, and you could effectively build an app that people could install that sucks down that information from their document and immediately creates a run job, rather than kind of emails and all those things. It becomes a lot more interactive. Content transformation, translation's an obvious one. It's probably going to be out of the box by Microsoft, I would suggest. But other things where you might take some results, manipulate it, transform it into a different language, add some of your own BI over the top of it and push it back. Social, again, probably not worth investing in things like Twitter clients. I would just guess that somebody from that organisation would create one. But blending in social with your app experience. So if you've got Yammer or SharePoint 2013 social in the enterprise, that comes with an object model that you can interact with. Your task pane effectively can allow you to do, oh, okay, I like that, or I follow that information. Dynamic content. So we didn't look at this as an example, but you can embed custom XML parts, which is part of a Word document kind of definition. You can build a template which then renders those in a particular format. So you can have a job that created a call to your line of business and pushes in XML into that document, and then there's a part of the page which is rendering it correctly. So the apps for Office opportunity really is huge, because everybody pretty much has Office on the desktop at some point. Microsoft will hope that 2013 will sell and be installed as quickly as 2010. That gives us an estimated 1 billion users of Office across the world. So if you come up with the next Angry Birds, which I'm sure somebody will, there's a pretty big market for it in Office. And then there's also the consideration that most people with Office in an enterprise also have some flavour of SharePoint somewhere. So you start being able to join the dots together. All right, before we go to questions, I'm just going to hope that the other thing has finally worked. No, okay. Well, apologies for the demo fail, as always, in the hands of somebody else. So is there any questions?